Was the adored Mr. really the kind person we all looked up to, or does his story have more to it? Generations felt protected, heard, and seen because of him. However, even Fred Rogers had a side that the cameras seldom showed behind that quiet voice. Because it gives you a chance to reflect on what was just said, it's about the things that are important to me, which I believe are more significant. Rogers' widow, however, disclosed a terrible reality prior to his passing, and it's hardly surprising what she revealed. It's very intimate. The reality may permanently alter your perception of America's favorite neighbor. What if the most potent children's program in television history relied on one man's ability to speak straight to your soul rather than ostentatious visuals or boisterous characters? Let's take a stroll around the neighborhood and discover the subtle revolution Fred sparked with a small show that had a huge impact. The program that revolutionized childhood was Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Being a TV star was never Fred Rogers' goal. More than everything, he aspired to meet kids where they were, in the midst of their developing hearts, great emotions, and little inquiries. And he accomplished it with a community that transformed lives, a serene voice, and perceptive eyes. There were no flashing lights, crazy characters, or fast-paced plots when Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood debuted on PBS in 1968. It was serene, perhaps deceptively so. After entering through the door, Fred Rogers would put on his famous cardigan, hang up his coat, change into sneakers, and begin singing "Won't You Be My Neighbor?" It was less like a TV show and more like a visit with a valued friend. However, that was the main objective. The play was constructed by Fred as a sort of emotional classroom. Fred helped children deal with emotions like fear, rage, grief, and joy by providing them with the vocabulary to grasp what was happening inside of them, while other programs taught them numbers and the alphabet. Without ever speaking down to its viewers, the program addressed issues like divorce, death, race, and handicap. Yes, it was slow television, but it was done with great purpose. Additionally, episodes explored the fanciful realm of make-believe, where puppets such as Lady Elaine Fairchild, Daniel Tiger, and King Friday the 13th performed mini-dramas that were based on actual events. Fred voiced a number of important puppets himself, each of which reflected a different aspect of his character. Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood ran for 31 seasons, from 1968 to 2001, with 895 episodes. Not only is that remarkable, but it's also unprecedented for a show with such a specialized goal. However, heart, not flair, was what gave it its longevity. Fred was aware that children didn't require additional noise. They required silence. They required truthfulness. Additionally, they required someone who didn't treat their issues like trivial matters. Every episode became into a tiny comforting time capsule. No commercial interruptions, no loud sound effects, and no laugh tracks. Only Fred, addressing the camera directly, as though he were addressing you personally. Additionally, the half hour with Mr. Rogers felt like the safest period of the day for many viewers, particularly those who were raised in chaotic families or felt alienated. The guest list occasionally created some stir, despite the show's subdued tone. Fred welcomed musicians, artists, scientists, individuals from all walks of life, and even animals, to take a seat and speak, instruct, or just be there. Individuals like Yo-Yo Ma demonstrated to children how music could express emotions that words couldn't. Even Julia Child, who entered Fred's kitchen with her charm and passion for cooking. Another guest was LeVar Burton, a fellow literacy advocate from Reading Rainbow. David Copperfield, who gave the neighborhood a touch of magic. Bennett, Tony, delivering his warm, sincere voice and smoothness. And even Coco the gorilla, who communicated with Fred via sign language, creating a memorable moment of intimacy that astounded the audience. Fred treated all of his guests with the same respect and decency that he showed his audience, regardless of their level of fame. The magic was that everyone was important. The TV business noticed. Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood received a great deal of recognition over the years, including 4 Daytime Emmy Awards for its excellence in children's programming, 55 Emmy nominations that demonstrated the show's consistency and influence, the Cine Golden Eagle Award for exceptional educational content like Let's Talk About Going to the Doctor, and a 1997 Daytime Emmy for Fred's lifetime achievement. He famously encouraged the audience to pause for 10 seconds during his victory speech and consider the people that shaped who they are. The whole room fell silent, but the prizes weren't the point. Knowing that kids felt loved and understood was Fred's real reward. Viewers' affection for Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood persisted even after the show's 2001 finale. New generations of children continue to learn about his serene voice, his soft knowledge, and his cardigan-clad presence thanks to YouTube and streaming services. Additionally, shows like Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood, which is produced by Fred Rogers Productions, continue his aim by introducing fresh characters and tales that are based on the same values of kindness and emotional honesty. "The greatest gift you ever give is your honest self," Fred once said. For more than 30 years he provided precisely that, and that reality is always in vogue in Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. You must meet the woman who supported Fred Rogers for his entire life in order to truly comprehend him. They have a really unexpected narrative. Joanne Rogers was who? Joanne Bird began crafting her own story before the name Mrs. Fred Rogers ever made headlines, and it was anything but typical. Joanne was born in 1928 in Jacksonville, Florida, and was raised in a household that emphasized meaningful conversation, music, and inquiry. Although they weren't ostentatious or well-off, her parents were determined and considerate. A traveling salesperson was her father's occupation, and her mother, a stay-at-home mother who frequently maintained order and affection in the home. Joanne was taught to listen even more, and to speak up when necessary from a young age. Joanne's passion for music soon transcended its status as a pastime. She spoke it. She was already causing a stir as a piano prodigy by the time she was in elementary school. She didn't play for attention. Playing gave her a sense of aliveness. She experimented with jazz, folk melodies, cool music, and classical music. She was obviously pursuing a career rather than only a pastime when she was accepted to Rollins College in Winter Park, Florida. Joanne, who majored in music performance at Rollins, immediately distinguished herself not only with her technical proficiency but also with the spirit she infused into each composition. Her instructors witnessed it. Her peers sensed it. Her capacity to connect and captivate audiences with notes that appeared to express more than words ever could, whether she was performing alone or with others, was evident. Joanne, however, was not the type to require attention. Fame was never her goal. She placed a higher emphasis on individuals, close friendships, open communication, and a feeling of belonging. Her laughter could light up a room, but she also understood when to halt and pose questions that made you think. After graduating from college, she furthered her education at Florida State University before traveling to Pittsburgh to attend Carnegie Tech, which is now Carnegie Mellon, where she honed her abilities and challenged her creativity. Her development as a woman and as a musician was the main focus of this phase of her life, figuring out her identity in the world. As a teacher, she also gave back. She shared her expertise and enthusiasm with young students while teaching at Chatham College's Preparatory School of Music in the 1950s. She later taught at Carlow College for 4 years in the early 1970s. Joanne was a skilled concert pianist in addition to being a teacher. She released 2 albums, Duo Piano Favorites and a Virtuoso Duo Piano Showcase, with her lifelong friend Janine Morrison, with whom she performed as a piano duo. Joanne wasn't conforming to a stereotype even at that time. She had no intention of becoming someone's spouse or sidekick. She envisioned a life filled with music, self-reliance, and the ability to fully express herself. She provided heart, humor, and an unwavering sense of serenity, whether it was in front of a piano or over coffee with a friend. Later in life, Joanne's contributions to the arts were acknowledged. In recognition of her lifetime commitment to music and education, Duke Snane University awarded her an honorary degree in 2019. Therefore, it wasn't a coincidence when she eventually met someone who had the same depth of character and inventiveness. 2 lives came together at the perfect moment. The legend's romantic origins. Looking at a marriage that has lasted for decades, and only seeing the surface is simple. A shared house, pictures of people wearing matching clothes, and a public smile. But with Joanne Rogers and Fred, the backstory that contributed to their love's extraordinary quality. They didn't shout their love. It began in the quiet nooks of a Florida college music hall. It was at Rollins College in the late 1940s that Fred and Joanne first met. Both majored in music, were devoted to their art, and were unknowingly on the verge of becoming one another's most significant individuals. Joanne was not the kind to be readily impressed. She had a keen mind that saw through pretense and a musical upbringing. She wasn't drawn to Fred's charisma or his promise for the future. It was the way he treated people with a gentleness that seemed uncommon, and the way he listened really listened. Even so, they continued to bond via performances, practice spaces, and piano labs. Candlelight and extravagant displays weren't the foundation of their relationship. They created something much more resilient, a collaboration based on emotional stability, intellectual connectedness, and a common rhythm. Yes, they shared a common musical language, but more significantly, they were able to hear one another in a manner that few others could. Their partnership didn't exactly get off to a great start after graduation. Joanne remained in Florida while Fred moved to New York to begin working for NBC. Long-distance relationships may seem difficult now, but in those days there were no FaceTime conversations or texts, just pen and paper and a lot of patience. Nevertheless, the letters continued. In addition to words, each envelope included layers of unsaid affection, desire, and growing trust. The letter with Fred's idea followed. The question that will influence both of their lives was tucked away amid updates and adoration. Joanne
was so ecstatic that she hurried to a nearby phone booth to respond so quickly, in fact, that she almost misplaced the letter. For good reason, she kept it safe after that. The beginning of something indestructible was that piece of paper. After being married in 1952, they started a journey that would last them more than 50 years. However, their union wasn't the type that looked well on a mantelpiece.
It was genuine, humorous, dirty, and alive. Their connection was still mostly based on music. The two would frequently perform duets on the piano, enjoying the harmony as much as the occasional error. They had their own shorthand and inside jokes. Joanne was Fred's safe haven when his job got too hard or the outside world got too noisy. John and James were their two sons. Home life was warm but regimented. Joanne was the family's emotional pillar in addition to being the mother of Fred Rogers' kids. She allowed for his process, respected his personal space, and pushed him when necessary. She was aware of his habit, his stillness, and his deeper layers that few people ever saw. Most significantly, she made no attempt to alter him. Fred Rogers is frequently thought of as being straightforward. Yes, kind, but simple as well. However, Joanne and others who knew him well recognized his layers. He bore the burden of other people's suffering. He was really concerned about being and doing enough. Only Joanne had a true understanding of that. She allowed him to be vulnerable and flawed, and she held his complexity without fear. Their marriage stayed rooted even as Fred rose to prominence in the public eye. Applause and attention were not their lifeblood. They thrived on music-filled mornings, spontaneous laughter that sprung from everyday situations, and the kind of friendship that comes from being completely understood and still loved. The beauty of what they shared was precisely that it wasn't a fairy tale. A love story based on hard work, mutual respect, and an unbreakable commitment lay behind the mythology. Joanne knew the man behind the camera, but the world only saw Mr. Rogers as the kind figure in a cardigan. She observed his discipline, anxieties, and fears. She kept those areas pure because she knew what the rest of the world didn't, and perhaps just possibly that is the true magic in their tale. They repeatedly selected it for over 50 years. Not because it was flawless, but because it was genuine. He was the neighbor we all loved when the cameras were rolling. But after the lights were down, a different Fred would appear in silence. The public image contrasts the private individual. What image comes to mind when you hear the name Fred Rogers? Most likely a composed man wearing a cozy cardigan, adjusting his shoes and speaking to you directly as if you were the most important person in the world. Like a lullaby, his voice was steady and gentle. His remarks seemed secure. Fred was more than just a TV host to a lot of people. As a child, he was the voice of consolation, a kind mentor through difficult emotions. People thought that the Fred you saw in Mr. Rogers' neighborhood was the actual one for years. No filter, no act, and that was accurate for the most part. What Fred Rogers taught, he lived. Even when there were no cameras rolling, he lived out his belief in kindness every day. This was often supported by his friends and colleagues. His narrative is more impactful because of how imperfect he was rather than how flawless he was. Joanne Rogers, Fred's wife of over 50 years, once remarked that although her husband was kind, he was not a saint. Not in the romanticized, inviolable manner that people sometimes think of. She was familiar with the real man, the one who, like the rest of us, struggled, felt fatigued, and battled with stress and uncertainty. She said that although it required work, the generosity was sincere. Fred decided to be nice. He put effort into it. That has a really honest quality to it. Fred appeared to be naturally at ease. On the inside, however, every action was guided by a modest discipline. To ensure he maintained his weight of 143 pounds, he weighed himself every day and went swimming every morning. He had a special meaning for that number. I'll take 1 letter. For love, 4. For you, 3. A little ceremony with a big impact. However, there was pressure to live up to the ideal of always being kind and considerate. Millions of children looked up to him after all. He didn't want to disappoint them. He was more burdened by the obligation than most people realized. Joanne witnessed the toll it took on him, even though he never openly complained about it. She observed the exhausting days and the fleeting moments of self-doubt. She also witnessed the times when their marriage was put to the test. Their relationship had its ups and downs, just like any other long-term one. Regarding their 2 sons, Joanne has stated that she was typically the one to discipline them. Fred struggled in that role because he was always the one who was gentle. Not everything was simple, and it didn't feel balanced all the time. He was personally invested in his work. He gave it everything he had. Sometimes that kind of emotional commitment can be taxing, not just for the worker but also for their family. Although Fred's aim was admirable, it also carried a great deal of responsibility. Occasionally, he had to bear the emotional burden of an entire generation while Joanne had to act as the anchor. It's amazing how human all of this is. We frequently like to praise others, label them heroes, and assume they never make mistakes. But that fantasy was not Fred's reality. He was a real person who made errors, needed breaks, and relied on others when things got tough. Joanne made his goodness even more valuable by allowing us to see that aspect of him, not to undermine him. Fred was moved. He was sensitive at times because he cared about people. That was Fred's unique quality. He decided to be patient,
Softness was his choice. Even though he had every reason to become frustrated, he made the decision to see the positive side of things. And that decision, that choice to live by love every day? A modest man wearing a sweater became a lasting legacy because of that. However, there is a terrible reality concealed beneath that composure and friendliness. Joanne Rogers was not afraid to share something that gives us a deeper understanding of Fred. The terrible reality. Your thoughts may immediately turn to anything startling or sensational when you hear the words awful truth. Joanne Rogers' revelations about Fred, however, are not a crazy secret. It's something far more genuine and delicate. This type of truth, which is enshrouded in suffering, vulnerability, and serene strength, is frequently more difficult to communicate. Fred Rogers was a man who was well known for his warmth, friendliness, and serene demeanor. Joanne, his wife, however, witnessed aspects of his life that few others ever saw. His fight with stomach cancer, which lasted until his last days, was not just a physical struggle but also a spiritual and emotional one for both of them. The terrible reality about the adored figure's personal struggles, rather than failure or shame, begins to surface in these private moments away from the spotlight and camera. Joanne has been open about how bravely Fred handled his sickness, but it also exposed lonely and insecure moments that were never part of his public image. Even Fred, who was kind and patient, had his personal struggles. Fred's illness was unexpected. He initially just experienced mild discomfort and indigestion, which were simple to dismiss or rationalize. Joanne recalls how he patiently dealt with his mounting discomfort and was cautious about what he ate in an attempt to control the pain on his own. However, they ultimately looked for answers when the suffering became unbearable. It was difficult news. The prognosis was poor, and the malignancy had spread. Fred's typical assurance gave way to fragility as a result of the physical toll, the lengthy treatment days, and the nagging realization that time was running out. This man persisted in moving forward because he was committed to continuing to be connected with the activities and people he loved. He even appeared as the Grand Marshal of the Pasadena Rose Parade in January 2003, a few weeks before he passed away, demonstrating his concern for his obligations and the environment. Fred stayed in the hospital for a while before returning home following surgery to remove a portion of his stomach. Joanne describes how, even when his body was weak, playing the piano gave him brief moments of comfort and serenity. A day after his grandson's birthday, on February 27, 2003, he died peacefully at home in the company of his loved ones. Joanne kept quiet about many of these details for years. It was done in part to protect Fred's privacy and the reputation he had built over the years. However, Joanne came to the realization that it was unfair to Fred's tale and his loved ones to keep this aspect of him hidden. She felt she could honor him more deeply and honestly if she told the truth. How the cancer impacted their
relationship is among the most poignant aspects of Joanne's observations. Fred had been their family's dependable, devoted pillar for a long time, but illness changed things. Joanne assumed the job of caregiver, which came with its own set of difficulties and emotional burden. She talks about experiencing both intense affection and the stress of seeing someone so vibrant face such a challenging struggle. In certain instances, the guy she greatly admired also needed her attention, tolerance, and perhaps simply her presence to support him through his suffering. In recent reports and interviews, such as the highly regarded documentary, Won't You Be My Neighbor, Joanne provided access to a few lesser-known accounts of Fred's final years. She mentioned, for instance, how he kept his humor even throughout the most trying times. Fred's illness did not take away his capacity to see the light in the dark. It merely changed, revealing a new but equally motivating part of him. In one interview, Joanne recounted the days before his death, even with delight. From a place of love and safety, Joanne chooses to share her experiences. She is aware of the significance of Fred's legacy and how he has served as a symbol of hope and goodwill for many. Now it's time to get your act together, she said, precisely 2 years after his death. For me, though, it's not always that way. On some days, I feel energetic. There are days when I feel exhausted. It can be very draining to grieve. Joanne's thoughts encourage us to view Fred Rogers as a man who, like everyone else, struggled with suffering and uncertainty rather than as a far-off legend. Nevertheless, he made the decision to live a genuine and kind life right up until the end. And for that reason, this reality is strong rather than tragically terrible. Joanne didn't put the book away even after Fred died. Rather, she turned the page, and everyone was surprised by what happened next. Joanne Rogers' contribution to Fred's legacy preservation and promotion. Many people thought Joanne Rogers would take a back seat and grieve in private after Fred Rogers died in 2003. However, she took a different route. She was the constant force that kept Fred's message alive rather than disappearing into the background. They led a caring and meaningful life together for almost 50 years, and Joanne made sure that spirit didn't go away with him. As chair emerita of Fred Rogers Productions, the very organization Fred founded to produce his beloved shows, Joanne held more than just a title. She was a real leader.
She ensured that Fred's work remained centered despite the rapid changes in the media landscape. Without sacrificing their kind, considerate tone, the programs kept teaching children about relationships, emotions, and comprehension. Through her leadership, Joanne prevented Fred's vision from fading into obscurity. Rather, it continued to expand and attract new families. Joanne also entered the spotlight. She constantly reminded people of the importance of kindness by sharing stories of Fred's life and beliefs on television and at gatherings. The importance of youngsters understanding their emotions and the environment around them was demonstrated by her voice, which spread Fred's lessons far beyond the initial neighborhood. Joanne was out there, ensuring that Fred's message remained relevant and alive, rather than just safeguarding his legacy in the background. You may have seen Joanne herself in a little but noteworthy role in the 2019 film A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. She stepped in and shared a portion of their life together with that cameo, which wasn't just a casting move. Viewers were able to see the woman who knew Fred the best, giving the on-screen narrative a genuine human touch. In addition to the film, Joanne made appearances in interviews and documentaries, providing viewers with an up-close look at the person who shared Fred's life on a daily basis. Joanne's role was not limited to highlighting Fred's generosity. Another important aspect of her story has been her passion for music. She was a gifted concert pianist who contributed her own originality and warmth. Like Fred's words, her music struck a chord with listeners, serving as a reminder that kindness and art go hand in hand. Joanne's humor and grounded intelligence, which matched Fred's warmth and made her the ideal companion in preserving his spirit, are frequently mentioned by those who know her. The lessons Fred Rogers left behind persisted in reverberating throughout the world he loved after his death in 2003. And none more potently than the straightforward, enigmatic code that he treasured most. Fred Rogers could have responded with 3 small digits if you had ever asked him what love looked like. 3 for 1. Do you recall that we discussed it earlier? It wasn't arbitrary. It wasn't fashionable. 1 for 3 indicated I love you to Fred. 3 letters in you, 4 in love, and 1 in I. Elegant and simple, and strong. It's the kind of message that you live, not yell. And he did precisely that. Fred talked about more than just love. He incorporated it into his everyday routine. For the majority of his adult life, he even maintained a weight of precisely 143 pounds. It's uncommon to see someone base their entire existence on a symbolic number. Fred was very deliberate in everything he said and did, each quiet interval in between phrases. He wasn't the only one with that number. His home state of Pennsylvania made the decision to commemorate his legacy in 2019 in a manner that felt very Fred. Since May 23rd is the 143rd day of the year, they formally declared it to be 143 Day. The goal was to be a nice neighbor, say something considerate, and act with kindness. Later, on January 14, 2021, Joanne died in their Pittsburgh home at the age of 92. As Fred would have desired, she was surrounded by family and friends. Their 2 sons and a legacy as sincere and enduring as Fred's have survived her. Fred and Joanne were not a showy couple. They were not required to be. They thought love was calming, steady, and transforming. And sometimes it just takes 3 numbers to convey I love you. Given that Joanne Rogers has spoken forward, is it possible that beneath Fred Rogers' kind face was a terrible truth that he silently took to his death and that everyone decided to ignore? Leave your thoughts in the comments area. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. Tap the next video on your screen to see more videos like this one.